Blood painted the desert road crimson as the afternoon sun bore down mercilessly on the woman's broken body. Tessa Hawkins fought to stay conscious, each shallow breath sending waves of pain through her battered ribs as the hoofbeats of her attackers faded into the distance. She couldn't move, couldn't call for help, could only watch as vultures began to circle overhead, patient harbingers of death in the vast Arizona territory. The year was 1878, and Tessa had learned the hard way that the promise of a new life in the West came with dangers she'd never imagined back in Boston. Her traveling coach had been ambushed just hours ago, the driver shot dead, and the other passengers, a kindly older couple, murdered before her eyes. The four men had taken everything of value, including her wedding ring, before beating her savagely and leaving her for dead beside the upturned coach, her wedding ring. The irony wasn't lost on her even as consciousness began to slip away. She'd been fleeing a marriage, not honoring one. The band had been her mother's, the only thing of value she'd brought when she escaped Philadelphia 3 months ago. The telegram promising work as a schoolteacher in Castle Dome had been her salvation from a future shackled to Frederick Winstead, a man whose cruelty she'd discovered too late. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered through her haze of pain. Perhaps the bandits were returning to finish what they'd started. Tessa closed her eyes, too weak to feel fear anymore. "Good Lord Almighty," a deep voice exclaimed. Rough hands, gentler than she expected, turned her over. Tessa forced her swollen eyes open to see a man's weathered face framed against the harsh blue sky. His expression was grim as he assessed her injuries. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice was low, tinged with a southern drawl. "I'm gonna help you, don't try to move," she wanted to reply but could only manage a faint groan. The stranger, whose features she could barely make out through her blurred vision, cursed softly as he examined the wound on her head. "Bastards," he muttered before calling out, "Sampson." "Bring the canteen, quick." Cool water touched her parched lips moments later. Tessa managed a small sip before coughing painfully. "Easy now," the man soothed. "What's your name, miss?" Tessa," she whispered. "I'm Rhett Lawson." His calloused fingers checked her pulse at the wrist. "You've been beaten something fierce, but I don't think you're dying today, not if I have anything to say about it." She felt herself being lifted, the movement sending shards of agony through her body. A whimper escaped her lips, despite her determination to remain silent. "I'm sorry for the pain," Rhett said, his voice tight with restraint. "But I need to get you somewhere safe. My ranch isn't far." Through her delirium, Tessa registered being placed on a horse. The stranger Rhett mounted behind her, one strong arm securing her against his chest. "Sampson," he called to someone she couldn't see, "ride ahead and tell Mrs. Benson to prepare a bed and hot water, and send for Doc Wilson." "Yes, boss," came the reply. As they rode, Tessa drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the solid presence of the man holding her. She didn't know if she could trust him, but at that moment she had no choice. "Stay with me, Tessa," Rhett's voice rumbled against her back. "Just a few more miles." She tried to focus on his words rather than the pain. The horse's gait was smooth, but every step jolted her injured body. After what seemed like hours, they approached a ranch house nestled against rocky foothills. Through her haze, Tessa made out a whitewashed building with a broad porch, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses. People emerged from the main house as they approached a plump woman wiping her hands on her apron, a tall man in ranch clothes, and several cowboys who stopped their work to stare. "Mrs. Benson," Rhett called as they reached the yard. "She's hurt bad, stagecoach robbery from the looks of it." The woman Mrs. Benson gasped when she saw Tessa's condition. "Bring her in, quickly. I've prepared the guest room." Strong arms lifted her from the horse. Tessa tried to thank him, but darkness claimed her before the words could form. She awoke to lamplight and unfamiliar surroundings. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the pain returned, and with it the memories, the attack, the cowboy on the road, being brought to his ranch. "You're awake." The voice came from beside the bed. Tessa turned her head slightly to see an older woman with kind eyes and gray streaked hair watching her with concern. "I'm Martha Benson, the housekeeper here at Lawson Ranch. You've been unconscious nearly a day, poor dear. The doctor's been and gone twice. The men who attacked me." Tessa managed to whisper. "Don't you worry about that now," Mrs. Benson said, placing a cool cloth on Tessa's forehead. "Mr. Lawson and some of the boys rode out at first light. They'll find who did this." Alarm shot through Tessa. "No, they're dangerous, 4 of them with guns." "Mr. Lawson took 8 men with him, all armed," Mrs. Benson assured her. "He's not one to act foolish, especially when it comes to outlaws." Tessa tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp as pain lanced through her ribs. "Easy now," the housekeeper cautioned. "You've got 2 broken ribs, a nasty head wound, and more bruises than I care to count. Doc Wilson says you need complete rest for at least a week." "I can't stay here," Tessa protested weakly. "I need to get to Castle Dome. They're expecting me the school teacher position." "Mrs. Benson's eyebrows rose. "You're the new school teacher." "Well, that explains the books we found with your things." She patted Tessa's hand. "Don't fret. Mr. Jenkins from town rode by yesterday. I sent word about what happened. They'll hold the position for you." Relief washed over Tessa, followed quickly by worry. "My belongings." "What wasn't stolen is here," Mrs. Benson said gently. "Your trunk was hidden under the overturned coach. The boys brought it back yesterday. Not much else was salvageable, I'm afraid." Tessa closed her eyes, fighting tears. Everything she owned was in that trunk: clothes, books, her mother's locket, and the teaching certificates that had been her ticket to independence. "Rest now," Mrs. Benson said. "I'll bring you some broth when you wake." Despite her intention to stay awake, exhaustion pulled Tessa back into darkness. The next time she woke, moonlight streamed through the window. Her throat was parched and she glanced around for water. A pitcher and glass sat on the bedside table, but they might as well have been miles away for all her ability to reach them. A soft knock at the door startled her. Before she could respond, it opened to reveal the man who had rescued her, Rhett Lawson. He looked different than the blurred image in her memory. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt, a strong jawline darkened with stubble, and eyes that appeared gray in the dim light. "Miss Hawkins," he said quietly, "I saw the lamplight under your door. Are you in need of anything?" "Water," she managed to say. He crossed to the table and poured a glass, then helped her sit up enough to drink, his hand supporting her head with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "Thank you," she said when she drunk her fill, "for everything." Rhett set the glass down and stepped back, as if suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with her in a bedroom. "It was nothing any decent man wouldn't do, did you?" She hesitated. "Did you find them?" "The men who attacked the stage coach," his expression hardened. "We tracked them as far as the territorial line but lost their trail in the mountains. They're heading toward New Mexico territory, best we can figure." He paused. "I've sent word to the marshals in the nearby towns." "Those men won't get far." "They killed the others," Tessa said, the memories flooding back. "An elderly couple, the Millers. They were traveling to see their son in Yuma, and the driver, they shot him without warning." Rhett's jaw tightened. "We found the bodies, gave them proper burials yesterday." "Thank you," she whispered. "Can you describe the men? Anything you remember might help track them down." Tessa closed her eyes, trying to recall details through the haze of terror. 4 of them. One was tall, with a beard split in 2 points. He seemed to be the leader. Another had a scar across his nose. The third was younger, maybe 20, with sandy hair. The 4th was heavyset with a missing front tooth. She shuddered. "They wore bandanas over their faces at first, but removed them when they were." "That's enough," Rhett said gently. "You've been through hell, Miss Hawkins. You should rest." "Please," she said, "call me Tessa. After saving my life, formality seems unnecessary." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Only if you'll call me Rhett." She nodded, suddenly exhausted again. "I'll let you rest," he said, moving toward the door. "Mrs. Benson will be up at first light with breakfast. If you need anything before then, just ring the bell." He indicated a small brass bell on the nightstand. "Rhett," she called softly as he reached the door. "Why are you doing this?" "Taking me in, hunting those men. You don't even know me." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. My sister was traveling by stagecoach 3 years ago. Outlaws attacked it just outside of El Paso. His voice was flat, emotionless. No one stopped to help her. Before Tessa could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the weight of his words. The following days passed in a blur of sleep, pain, and gradual healing. Mrs. Benson proved to be both an excellent nurse and a fountain of information about Rhett Lawson and his ranch. The property, she explained while changing Tessa's bandages, had been established by Rhett's father 15 years earlier. When both parents died of fever 5 years ago, Rhett had taken over, expanding the operation from a modest cattle ranch to one of the largest in the territory. "He's a good man," Mrs. Benson said, though not one for much talking, "keeps to himself mostly except for ranch business. Has he always been so?" Tessa searched for the right word. "Serious," Mrs. Benson supplied. "No, not always. He was different before Elizabeth died." "His sister," Tessa said softly. Mrs. Benson looked surprised. "He told you about her. That's not like him at all." By the 4th day, Tessa was strong enough to sit up in bed without assistance. On the 5th, she managed to stand and walk slowly around her room. Rhett had not visited again, though Mrs. Benson assured her he asked after her health daily. "He's busy with the spring calving," the housekeeper explained, "and there's been trouble with cattle rustlers in the north pastures." On the 6th day, a package arrived from town along with a note from Mr. Jenkins, the head of the Castle Dome School Board. He expressed dismay at her ordeal and assured her the teaching position would be held for her until she recovered. The package contained several dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, and toiletries, practical items to replace what had been stolen. "Mr. Lawson arranged it," Mrs. Benson said when Tessa expressed surprise at the generous gift. "Said a lady shouldn't be without proper attire, even when convalescing." That evening, dressed in one of the new gowns, a simple blue cotton dress with modest lace trim, Tessa made her first venture downstairs for dinner. Mrs. Benson hovered nearby as she carefully descended the staircase, still weak but determined to regain her independence. The dining room was larger than she expected, with a long oak table that could seat at least 12 people. Tonight, only 2 places were set, one at the head of the table and another to the right of it. "Mr. Lawson usually takes his meals alone," Mrs. Benson explained, "but when I told him you were feeling well enough to come down, he asked to join you." As if on cue, the door opened and Rhett entered. He'd cleaned up since Tessa had last seen him, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. He wore a crisp white shirt and dark trousers rather than the ranch clothes she'd glimpsed him in from her window. "Miss Hawkins," he said, his expression warming slightly, "it's good to see you on your feet." "Thanks to your hospitality," she replied, "and please remember it's Tessa." He nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Tessa, then." He pulled out her chair, waiting for her to be seated before taking his own place at the head of the table. Mrs. Benson disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a tureen of soup. "I hope you have an appetite," Rhett said as the housekeeper served them. Mrs. Benson's beef stew is the best in the territory. "It smells wonderful," Tessa said sincerely. They ate in silence for several minutes. Tessa was grateful for the hearty meal after days of broth and soft foods, though her appetite was still not fully returned. "I received word today," Rhett said finally, setting down his spoon. "The marshals caught 2 of the men who attacked your stagecoach. They were trying to sell your belongings in a trading post near the New Mexico line." Tessa's hand trembled, spilling a drop of stew onto the tablecloth. "Which ones?" "The young one with sandy hair and the one with the missing tooth. They're being held in Tucson awaiting trial." "And the others?" Rhett's expression darkened. "Still at large, but they won't be for long." The captured men gave up their names, Jacob Reeves and Samuel Cortland. "They're known outlaws with prices on their heads." "Will I need to testify?" Tessa asked, dreading the prospect of facing her attackers again. "Eventually, yes, but the trial won't be for months." His gray eyes met hers. "By then, you'll be settled in Castle Dome, teaching school as you planned. This will all be behind you." The confidence in his voice was reassuring, though Tessa wasn't sure she would ever fully put the attack behind her. "Thank you for the clothes," she said, changing the subject. "It was very thoughtful." "It was the least I could do," he replied. "I hope they fit adequately. Mrs. Benson provided the measurements." "They're perfect," Tessa assured him, "but I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. The clothes, the doctor, room, and board." Rhett waved a hand dismissively. "There's no debt. I wouldn't have it any other way." "Still, I can't impose on you indefinitely. The school term begins in 3 weeks, and Doc Wilson says you need at least 2 more weeks of rest before traveling," Rhett interrupted firmly. "The school board has already agreed to wait. There's no rush." Tessa wanted to protest, but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Besides, he was right, she was still weak, her ribs ached constantly, and the thought of jostling along in another stagecoach made her stomach clench with both pain and fear. 2 weeks then, she conceded. "But I insist on making myself useful while I'm here. Perhaps I could help Mrs. Benson with household tasks or assist with correspondence." A genuine smile crossed Rhett's face, transforming his stern features. "Mrs. Benson would appreciate the help, I'm sure. And as it happens, I could use someone with a proper education to go through the ranch accounts. My foreman tries his best, but numbers aren't his strong suit." "I'd be happy to look at them," Tessa said, pleased to have found a way to be useful. The rest of the meal passed more comfortably, with Rhett asking about her background and training as a teacher. Tessa shared details of her education at a women's college in Philadelphia and her brief experience teaching in a Boston school. She carefully avoided mentioning her hasty departure from Philadelphia or the man she'd left behind. When Mrs. Benson brought an apple pie for dessert, Rhett surprised Tessa by asking about her family. "My parents died when I was 16, she explained. "My father from heart failure, my mother from pneumonia 6 months later. I lived with my aunt until I completed my education, then took the teaching position in Boston." "And what brought you all the way to Arizona Territory?" he asked, his perceptive gaze making her uncomfortable. Tessa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I saw an advertisement for a teacher in Castle Dome. The salary was generous, and I've always been drawn to the idea of the West." It wasn't a lie, precisely, but it wasn't the whole truth either. If Rhett sensed her evasion, he didn't press. Instead, he nodded and changed the subject to the town she would soon call home. "Castle Dome is growing fast," he told her. "The silver mines are bringing in new families weekly. That's why they need a proper teacher, nearly 40 children in the area now, with more coming." "Do you go to town often?" Tessa asked, when necessary. "Mostly for supplies or banking. It's a half-day ride each way, so not a trip I make lightly." By the time they finished dessert, Tessa was fighting exhaustion. Rhett noticed her stifling a yawn and immediately stood. "You should rest," he said. "I've kept you up too long with my questions." "Not at all," she protested. "It's been a pleasure to have adult conversation after days in bed." He offered his arm to help her from her chair. Tessa took it gratefully, still unsteady on her feet. They walked slowly to the staircase, where she reluctantly released his arm to grasp the railing. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for the news about the captured outlaws. I'll let you know when I hear more," he promised. "Good night, Tessa." "Good night, Rhett." As she made her way carefully up the stairs, she could feel his eyes following her, making sure she reached the top safely. The concern touched her more deeply than she cared to admit. The next morning, true to her word, Tessa began helping Mrs. Benson with light household tasks. The housekeeper was initially reluctant to allow her to work, but Tessa insisted that activity would help her recover faster than bed rest. "Just don't overdo it," Mrs. Benson cautioned. "Mr. Lawson would have my hide if you collapsed under my watch." Tessa smiled at the older woman's protective tone. "I promise to be careful, and I'll rest the moment I feel tired." She spent the morning folding linens and polishing silver, tasks that didn't strain her healing ribs. After lunch, Rhett brought her the ranch ledgers as promised. He set up a small desk for her in the corner of the parlor, near a window with good light. "These are a mess," he admitted, placing 3 leather-bound books before her. "Tucker, my foreman, tries his best, but he's more comfortable with horses than numbers." Tessa opened the top book and scanned the entries, noting immediately the haphazard bookkeeping. "I can straighten this out," she assured him, "though it may take a few days. Take all the time you need, I'll be grateful for any improvement." He lingered a moment. "You're sure you're feeling well enough for this?" "Absolutely," she said firmly. "I need to keep my mind occupied." He nodded, seeming to understand. "I'll be out with the herd until supper. If you need anything, Mrs. Benson or one of the house hands can fetch me." After he left, Tessa immersed herself in the ledgers. The work was surprisingly satisfying, bringing order to the chaotic entries. By mid-afternoon, she had reorganized one book entirely and started on the second. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Rhett's return until his shadow fell across the desk. "You've been at this for hours," he observed, concern evident in his voice. "You should rest." Tessa looked up, startled to see that the light had changed, the afternoon sun now casting long shadows through the window. "I lost track of time," she admitted. "The accounts are actually quite interesting. You're running a substantial operation here." "My father built it from nothing," Rhett said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I've just tried to keep it going and growing." He glanced at her work. "You've made considerable progress." "I've reorganized by month and category," she explained. "It will make it easier to track expenses and income. I've also started noting patterns in the cattle sales. You might get better prices if you adjusted your timing slightly." His eyebrows rose. "You determined all that in one afternoon?" Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "I've always had a head for numbers. My father was an accountant before his illness. He taught me from a young age. A fortunate education for me," Rhett said with a smile. "Come, Mrs. Benson has tea ready on the porch. The fresh air will do you good." The porch wrapped around three sides of the ranch house, providing shade and catching any breeze. Mrs. Benson had set a small table with tea and biscuits in a corner that offered a view of the distant mountains. Tessa sank gratefully into a cushioned chair, only now realizing how tired she had become. "It's beautiful here," she remarked as Rhett poured the tea. "It grows on you," he agreed, handing her a cup. "I didn't appreciate it properly when I was younger. Always thought I'd head east eventually, maybe to San Francisco or even back to Virginia where my parents came from." "What changed your mind?" His expression grew distant. "Life, death." "Responsibilities," he shrugged. "After my parents died and then Elizabeth, the ranch became everything, a purpose." Tessa nodded, understanding all too well how life's paths could shift unexpectedly. "Do you have other family?" "None living," he said. Just my aunt in Philadelphia." "We're not close." They fell silent, watching as cowboys drove a small herd of cattle toward a distant pasture. The peaceful scene was a stark contrast to the violence Tessa had experienced days earlier. Yet somehow the horror felt more distant with each passing day at the ranch. "I spoke with the marshal in Tucson again today," Rhett said after a while. "The two captured men have confessed to a string of robberies, not just yours. They'll hang for certain. And the other two, still searching. They've got posses out and I've hired a Pima tracker who knows the territory better than most. It's just a matter of time." Tessa shivered despite the warm air. "What if they come here? They saw your men tracking them." "They won't," Rhett said with quiet confidence. "My ranch is well known and well defended. 20 armed men work these lands. Besides, outlaws like that prefer easy targets, lone travelers, small homesteads, not established ranches." His assurance eased her fear somewhat, but the memory of those men's faces, especially the bearded leader with the cold eyes, still haunted her dreams. That night, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. Tessa woke screaming, her body drenched in sweat, the phantom pain of fists striking her face feeling all too real. Before she could orient herself, her bedroom door flew open and Rhett rushed in, a lamp in one hand and a revolver in the other. "What happened?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the room for threats. Tessa pulled the blankets up to her chin, mortified. "Nothing, I'm sorry, just a nightmare." Rhett lowered the gun, relief evident on his face. He set the lamp on the bedside table and returned the revolver to his waistband. In the lamplight, she noticed he wore only trousers and an unbuttoned shirt, as if he'd dressed hastily at the sound of her scream. I apologize for the intrusion, he said, suddenly awkward, when I heard you cry out. No, I should apologize, Tessa insisted. I didn't mean to wake the household. You didn't. My room is just down the hall and I was reading late. He hesitated, then asked gently, Do you have these nightmares often? Tessa looked down, twisting the bedsheet between her fingers. Since the attack, yes, almost every night. Rhett's expression softened. I understand. After Elizabeth died, I couldn't close my eyes without seeing her. It gets better with time. The compassion in his voice brought unexpected tears to Tessa's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. I hope so. I hate feeling so afraid. Fear is natural after what you've been through, he said, but you're safe here, I promise you that. The sincerity in his gray eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you. An awkward silence fell between them, both suddenly aware of the impropriety of his presence in her bedroom at night. Rhett cleared his throat and moved toward the door. Try to rest, he said, and don't hesitate to ring the bell if you need anything. After he left, Tessa lay awake for a long time, her mind replaying their conversation. There was something comforting about Rhett Lawson, despite his sometimes gruff exterior. A steadiness that made her feel secure for the first time in months. The thought was unsettling. She'd come west to start anew, to be independent, not to develop feelings for the first kind man she encountered. Besides, her past still loomed behind her. Frederick had connections and resources. If he discovered her whereabouts, Tessa pushed the thought away. She was hundreds of miles from Philadelphia now, in a territory where Frederick's influence couldn't reach. Once she took up her position in Castle Dome, she would create the life she'd dreamed of, teaching by day, perhaps writing in the evenings. A life of her own making. Still, as she drifted back to sleep, it was Rhett's face she saw not in nightmares, but in a dream far more pleasant and ultimately more dangerous to her plans for independence. The following days fell into a comfortable routine. Tessa spent mornings helping Mrs. Benson with household tasks, afternoons working on the ranch accounts, and evenings on the porch or in the parlor conversing with Rhett. Her strength returned gradually, the bruises faded, and her ribs began to heal. Only the nightmares persisted, though less frequently as the days passed. Rhett, she discovered, was a man of contradictions. Stern with his ranch hands but unfailingly gentle with her. Reserved about personal matters, yet well-read and thoughtful when discussing books or current events. He traveled extensively in his youth, even spending a year in Europe after completing his education at a Virginia military academy. What brought you back west? Tessa asked one evening as they sat in the parlor, a chessboard between them. Rhett moved his knight, capturing her bishop. Family obligation initially. My father's health was failing. Then I discovered I preferred the openness out here to the constraints of Eastern society. Tessa studied the board, considering her next move. I can understand that appeal. Society has many expectations, especially for women. Is that why you left Boston? He asked, his perceptive gaze making her uncomfortable. Tessa hesitated, then decided a partial truth was better than an outright lie. In part, I was expected to marry well and give up teaching. I wasn't ready to abandon my independence. And now? What do you hope to find in Castle Dome? Freedom, she said simply, moving her queen. The chance to build a life on my own terms. Check, Rhett said, his rook threatening her king. Freedom comes with its own risks out here. As I discovered rather brutally, Tessa acknowledged, moving her king to safety. But the alternative was worse. He looked as if he wanted to ask more, but instead returned his attention to the game. Several moves later, he declared, checkmate, as his queen trapped her king. Well played, Tessa conceded. Though I expect nothing less from a military academy graduate. You gave me a proper challenge, he said, his lips curving in a rare full smile. Most people around here won't play with me anymore. They say I'm too competitive. Perhaps they simply haven't given you sufficient opposition, she returned with a smile of her own. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth entering his eyes that made her heart beat faster. For a moment, Tessa thought he might reach across the table and take her hand. Instead, he began resetting the chess pieces. Another game tomorrow, he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I'd like that," she replied, equally careful to keep her tone light. As she climbed the stairs to her room that night, Tessa acknowledged to herself what she'd been trying to deny for days. She was developing feelings for Rhett Lawson. Feelings that complicated her plans and threatened the independence she'd sacrificed so much to attain. She would be leaving for Castle Dome in less than a week. The smart course would be to guard her heart, to thank Rhett for his hospitality, and ride away without looking back. But even as she resolved to do exactly that, she knew it wouldn't be so simple. The next morning brought unexpected excitement to the ranch. Tessa was helping Mrs. Benson in the kitchen when they heard the thunder of approaching horses. Through the window, she saw Rhett and several ranch hands rush out to meet a group of riders entering the yard at a gallop. The newcomers included 2 men in marshals' uniforms. "Looks like news," Mrs. Benson remarked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Let's hope it's good." They watched as Rhett spoke with the marshals, his expression grave. After several minutes, he nodded and gestured toward the house. The group dismounted and followed him inside, their boots loud on the wooden porch. "Mrs. Benson," Rhett called as they entered, "some coffee for our guests, please." "Right away, Mr. Lawson," the housekeeper replied. Tessa started to retreat to her room, not wanting to intrude, but Rhett spotted her. "Tessa," he said, "these men have news that concerns you, Marshal Dawson from Tucson and Deputy Marshal Collins." The older of the 2 lawmen touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Hawkins. Heard what happened to you, terrible business." "Have you found the other 2 men?" Tessa asked, her heart racing. "That's why we're here," the marshal replied. "We tracked Reeves and Cortland to a mining camp near the border. Cortland resisted arrest and was killed. Reeves is in custody." Relief washed over Tessa, making her knees weak. She sank into a nearby chair. "So it's over, almost," Rhett said, his expression still troubled. "There's more, Tessa." Marshal Dawson cleared his throat. "The prisoners have been talking, hoping for leniency. They say the stagecoach robbery wasn't random. They were hired to do it." Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. "Hired by whom?" "A man named Frederick Winstead," the marshal said. "Mean anything to you?" For a moment, Tessa couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin around her, and she gripped the arms of the chair to steady herself. "Tessa." Rhett was suddenly beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Do you know this man?" She nodded, unable to find her voice immediately. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "He's the reason I left Philadelphia." Understanding dawned in Rhett's eyes, followed quickly by anger. "What does this man want with you?" Before Tessa could answer, Marshal Dawson spoke. "According to the prisoners, he wants her back dead or alive. Preferably alive, but he wasn't particular about her condition when they delivered her." Rhett's hand tightened on her shoulder, his voice hardening. "Is he here, in Arizona territory?" "Not yet," the marshal replied. "But the prisoners say he wired them money in Tucson. He could be on his way." "Or he could send more men," Tessa said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Frederick isn't the type to dirty his hands personally if he can avoid it." "Miss Hawkins," the deputy spoke for the first time, "we need to know the nature of your relationship with this man. Is he family?" "A business associate." Tessa looked down at her hands, shame and fear warring within her. "He was my fiancé," she admitted. "A match arranged by my aunt after my parents died. I discovered too late what kind of man he truly was." "He hurt you?" Rhett asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She nodded, unwilling to elaborate with the marshals present. "When I learned I'd been accepted for the teaching position in Castle Dome, I saw my chance to escape. I left in the night 3 months ago. I've been traveling under my mother's maiden name since then." Marshal Dawson frowned. "This complicates matters. If you were legally betrothed, there was no legal contract," Tessa interrupted firmly. "Only a verbal agreement between Frederick and my aunt, who had no legal guardianship over me. I'm 23 years old, a legal adult who chose to terminate an unofficial engagement." "Even so," the marshal said, "if this Winstead comes looking for you, we should be prepared. Do you have any proof of misconduct on his part?" Tessa thought of the bruises Frederick had left, long faded now. The threats always made in private. The way he'd systematically isolated her from friends and controlled every aspect of her life. Nothing that would stand in court, she admitted bitterly. Rhett had been silent, but now he spoke with quiet authority. Miss Hawkins is under my protection until she assumes her position in Castle Dome. After that, she'll be under the protection of that community, his gaze fixed on Marshal Dawson. I trust the law will also do its part, of course, the Marshal assured him. We'll keep an eye out for this Winstead character, and the surviving robbers will face justice for the murders and assault, regardless of who hired them. Mrs. Benson entered with coffee, and the conversation paused as she served the men. Tessa excused herself, needing a moment alone to process this shocking development. In her room, she paced anxiously, her mind racing. Frederick had found her. Even now, he might be on his way to Arizona. The thought made her physically ill. How had he traced her? She'd been so careful, changing her name, taking indirect routes, paying with cash rather than bank drafts that could be traced. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Tessa," Rhett's voice came through the door, "may I speak with you?" She opened the door, composing her features as best she could. "The Marshals are gone. They're having coffee with Mrs. Benson before heading back to town." He hesitated. "May I come in? What I have to say is private." Propriety dictated she refuse, but Tessa was beyond caring about such niceties. She stepped aside to let him enter, leaving the door ajar for appearance's sake. Rhett stood awkwardly in the center of the room, his hat in his hands. "I owe you an apology," he said after a moment. "Whatever for?" "For not asking more about your past, for not realizing you were running from someone." His jaw tightened. "If I'd known, I would have taken additional precautions." "You couldn't have known," Tessa said gently. "I deliberately kept it from you, from everyone. I was ashamed." Ashamed. Rhett's eyes narrowed. "Of what that man did to you, that's not your shame to carry, Tessa." His vehemence surprised her. "Still, I should have been honest with you after everything you've done for me." "Your past is your own," Rhett said. "You don't owe me or anyone explanations." He paused, then added carefully, "But if you want to talk about it, I'm here to listen, without judgment." Tessa moved to the window, gathering her thoughts. After a moment, she spoke without turning. "Frederick Winstead is one of Philadelphia's most respected businessmen. Wealthy, charming in public, generous to charities, the perfect suitor according to my aunt." She took a deep breath before continuing. "The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after our engagement was announced. I'd spoken too long with another gentleman at a dinner party. He waited until we were alone, then backhanded me so hard I fell against a table. Then he apologized, blamed the champagne, sent flowers the next day." Behind her, she heard Rhett's sharp intake of breath but forced herself to continue. "It escalated from there. Control first, who I spoke to, what I wore, where I went. Then more violence, always carefully placed where bruises wouldn't show. When I threatened to break the engagement, he threatened my aunt's reputation, my teaching position, everything I had left." "How did you get away?" Rhett asked softly. "The letter from Castle Dome arrived offering the teaching position. It was like a lifeline. I withdrew my savings, packed what I could carry, and left in the night. I've been traveling for 3 months, taking circuitous routes, staying in each place just long enough to earn money for the next leg of the journey." She turned to face him. "I thought I'd finally lost him." Rhett's expression was a mixture of anger and compassion. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Tessa, nothing. But now I've brought danger to your doorstep," she said miserably. "Those men who attacked the stagecoach were looking for me. The other passengers died because of me." "No," Rhett said firmly. "They died because evil men chose to commit murder. Just as you suffered because Frederick Winstead chose cruelty over decency. None of that is your responsibility." His words loosened something in Tessa's chest, a knot of guilt she'd been carrying for months. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away, embarrassed by the display of emotion. "What will you do now?" Rhett asked after giving her a moment to compose herself. "What I planned to do all along," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "Go to Castle Dome, begin teaching, live my life. And if Winstead comes, then I'll face him," she said, more bravely than she felt. "I'm not the same frightened woman who fled Philadelphia. I won't let him control me through fear any longer." Rhett studied her for a long moment, respect evident in his gaze. You're a remarkable woman, Tessa Hawkins. The compliment warmed her, but reality quickly reasserted itself. Even so, I should leave your ranch as soon as possible. Your hospitality has already put you at risk. Absolutely not, Rhett said firmly. You'll stay until you're fully healed, as planned. This ranch is well defended, and now that we know to be watchful, Winstead or his hired men won't catch us unaware. But no arguments, he insisted. Besides, Marshal Dawson is sending word to all the stagecoach and rail stations in the territory. If Winstead shows his face anywhere in Arizona, we'll know about it. His confidence was reassuring, though Tessa knew from bitter experience how resourceful Frederick could be. Still, she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder. Thank you, she said simply. Rhett smiled, a genuine warmth replacing the anger in his eyes. We're in this together now, Tessa. You're not alone anymore. The words touched her deeply, stirring emotions she'd kept carefully guarded. Before she could respond, Mrs. Benson called from downstairs that the marshals were leaving. I should see them off, Rhett said reluctantly. Of course. At the door he paused. Join me for a ride this afternoon. The doctor said exercise would help your healing, and there's a place I'd like to show you. The invitation surprised her. I'd like that, but I haven't ridden in years. I have a gentle mare that would suit you, he assured her, and we won't go far. Then yes, Tessa agreed, suddenly eager for the outing and the company. After Rhett left, Tessa sat on the edge of her bed, her emotions in turmoil. Relief that her attackers had been caught ward with fresh fear of Frederick's pursuit. And beneath it all, growing stronger by the day, was her attraction to Rhett Lawson. He'd been nothing but kind and respectful, never pressing for more than she was willing to give. But in the way he looked at her, the gentleness of his touch when helping her navigate stairs or mount a horse, she sensed he might feel the same pull she did. It was a complication she hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford, not with Frederick potentially on her trail, not with her position in Castle Dome waiting. Yet as she prepared for their ride, selecting one of the new dresses that would be suitable for horseback, Tessa couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. The mare Rhett chose for her was indeed gentle, a dappled gray with a smooth gait that didn't strain Tessa's healing ribs. They rode at an easy pace, following a creek that wound through Lawson property. The spring landscape was surprisingly lush, with wildflowers dotting the grasslands and cottonwoods providing occasional shade. It's beautiful, Tessa remarked, breathing deeply of the clean, sage-scented air. Different from what I expected of Arizona. Most Easterners picture nothing but desert, Rhett said, smiling. We have that too, but the territory is more varied than people realize. He pointed toward the mountains rising in the distance. Up there are pine forests and meadows that rival anything in your New England. I'd like to see that someday. Perhaps you will. Castle Dome is nestled at the base of those same mountains. They rode in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the warm afternoon. Tessa found herself relaxing for the first time in days, the fear of Frederick temporarily pushed aside by the beauty of the landscape and Rhett's steadying presence beside her. Eventually, the creek widened into a small pond, its surface glittering in the sunlight. A massive cottonwood provided shade along one bank, and Rhett guided his horse toward it. This is what I wanted to show you, he said, dismounting. My private thinking spot. I come here when ranch decisions weigh too heavily. He helped Tessa from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The contact sent warmth through her despite the afternoon heat. It's peaceful, she said, moving toward the water's edge. I can see why you come here. Rhett spread a blanket in the shade of the cottonwood and produced a small bundle from his saddlebag. Mrs. Benson insisted we bring refreshments, he explained, unwrapping bread, cheese, and apples. She seems to think I'll waste away if I miss a single meal. Tessa laughed, settling carefully onto the blanket. She's very protective of you. She practically raised me after my mother died, Rhett admitted, sitting beside her. I was 12, Elizabeth only 8. Mrs. Benson stepped in when my father was too grief-stricken to manage. She loves you like a son, and lectures me like one too, he said with a wry smile. Especially about my unmarried state. She's determined to see me settled before she's too old to bounce grandchildren on her knee. The comment hung in the air between them, unexpectedly intimate. Tessa busied herself with selecting a slice of cheese, unsure how to respond. "I've embarrassed you," Rhett said softly. "I apologize." "No, not at all," she assured him. "It's just unexpected to hear you speak of such personal matters. You bring it out in me, I suppose." He handed her an apple, their fingers brushing. "I find myself telling you things I rarely discuss with anyone." Tessa met his eyes, seeing warmth and something more in their gray depths. "I feel the same way with you. It's disconcerting, disconcerting." He repeated, a hint of humor in his voice. Not quite the reaction a man hopes for. "You know what I mean," she said, feeling her cheeks warm. "We've known each other such a short time, yet I feel as if—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express the connection she felt without revealing too much. "As if we've known each other much longer," Rhett finished for her. "I feel it too, Tessa." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. The gentle touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "I know you're planning to leave," he said quietly. "That you have your position in Castle Dome waiting, but I find myself wishing you would stay." Tessa's heart raced at his words. "Rhett, you don't need to answer," he interrupted gently. "I understand your desire for independence, especially after what you've endured. I would never ask you to give up the freedom you've fought so hard to gain." "Then what are you asking?" she whispered. "Time," he said simply. "Time to know you better. Time for you to know me. Time to see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, is worth exploring." The honesty in his voice moved her deeply. Here was a man who respected her choices, who didn't seek to control or possess her. A man as different from Frederick as day from night. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "Of me?" The pain in his eyes was evident. "No," she assured him quickly. "Never of you, of myself, of making another mistake. Of losing the independence I've only just begun to taste." Rhett nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Those are valid fears, Tessa. I won't pretend they're not." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "All I ask is that you don't let fear of me, of Winstead, of the future dictate your choices. You've been brave enough to build a new life. Be brave enough to consider all possibilities within it." The wisdom in his words struck her. Wasn't she still allowing Frederick to control her if fear of him prevented her from exploring feelings for another man? "I don't know what the future holds," she said honestly. "Castle Dome is still where I need to go. It's the opportunity I've worked toward." "I understand," Rhett said, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "But," Tessa continued, gathering her courage, "Castle Dome isn't so far from your ranch. Perhaps we could continue to know each other, to see if these feelings lead somewhere worth following." Hope replaced disappointment in his expression. "I'd like that very much." He leaned toward her slowly, his intentions clear. Tessa's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't pull away. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss, brief but filled with promise. When he drew back, his smile warmed her more than the Arizona sun. They spent another hour by the pond, talking easily of lighter matters, books they'd both read, places they'd seen, childhood memories. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Rhett reluctantly suggested they return to the ranch. "I promised Mrs. Benson we'd be back before dark," he explained, helping Tessa to her feet. "And you shouldn't overexert yourself on your first ride." The return journey seemed shorter somehow, the landscape bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Tessa felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months, perhaps years. The shadow of Frederick still loomed, but it seemed less threatening now. As they approached the ranch, however, the peaceful mood shattered. A rider was galloping toward them, his horse lathered with sweat. Rhett immediately tensed, placing his horse between Tessa and the approaching rider. "It's Tucker," he said, recognizing his foreman. "Something's wrong." Tucker reined in his horse beside them, his expression grim. "Boss, you need to get back to the house. Marshal Dawson sent a rider. That Philadelphia fella Winstead, he's been spotted in Tucson." Tessa's blood ran cold. "Frederick here already?" "Apparently arrived on yesterday's train," Tucker confirmed. Marshall's got men watching him but wanted you to know right away. Rhett's expression hardened. How many men with him? Just one, according to the Marshal's message, his personal secretary or some such. Just one that they've seen, Rhett corrected grimly. Get back to the house and tell Mrs. Benson to prepare Tessa's things. She'll be leaving for Castle Dome tonight. No, Tessa protested. Running now would only delay the inevitable. Frederick won't give up until he finds me. Castle Dome has a sheriff and a community that will protect you, Rhett argued. It's safer than the ranch. Is it? Tessa challenged. A small mining town where everyone knows everyone's business. Where a newcomer, especially one like Frederick, would be instantly noticed and his questions answered, he'd find me within hours. Rhett frowned, considering her words. What do you suggest, then? I face him, Tessa said firmly. On my terms, not his. With witnesses present who can testify to anything he says or does. Tucker shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Miss, begging your pardon, but if this fella is as dangerous as the Marshal suggests. He relies on privacy for his violence, Tessa explained. He would never strike me in public, never threaten openly. His reputation means everything to him. Rhett studied her face, then nodded slowly. You know him best. If you believe confronting him is the right course, I'll support your decision. He turned to Tucker. Ride back and tell Mrs. Benson to prepare the formal dining room for guests tomorrow. We'll be inviting Marshal Dawson and Mr. Winstead for lunch. Tucker's eyes widened. You're inviting the man here. Boss, are you sure that's wise? It's what Tessa wants, Rhett said simply. And she's right, better to face him on our ground with our people around us than to have him hunting her. As you say, boss. Tucker touched his hat brim, then wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward the ranch. When he was gone, Rhett turned to Tessa. Are you certain about this? There's still time to get you to Castle Dome or even further, perhaps California. Tessa shook her head. I've been running for months, Rhett. It hasn't worked. Frederick's found me despite all my precautions. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. It ends with you safe and free, Rhett said firmly. I promise you that. The conviction in his voice gave her strength. For the first time since fleeing Philadelphia, Tessa felt truly protected, not because Rhett was physically imposing or carried a gun, but because he respected her enough to let her make her own choices while standing firmly beside her. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding. He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. Always. They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in silence, each lost in thought about the confrontation to come. As the house came into view, Tessa straightened in her saddle, determination replacing fear. Tomorrow she would face Frederick Winstead for the last time, not as his frightened fiancé, but as a woman who had found her strength and, perhaps, a man worthy of her heart. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching Arizona day. Tessa dressed with special care, selecting the most formal of the dresses. Rhett had provided a deep blue cotton with white trim that was modest yet flattering. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style and even added a touch of color to her pale cheeks with the rouge Mrs. Benson offered. You look beautiful, the housekeeper said approvingly, and strong. That's important for today. Thank you, Tessa replied, grateful for the woman's support. For everything. Downstairs, the formal dining room had been prepared for lunch. The table gleamed with polished silver and the ranch's best china, fresh flowers from Mrs. Benson's garden providing a centerpiece. It was a setting designed to impress and to remind Frederick Winstead that he was on unfamiliar ground. Rhett waited in the parlor, dressed more formally than Tessa had ever seen him, in a tailored black suit and crisp white shirt. He looked every inch the successful rancher, a far cry from the trail-dusty cowboy who had found her on the road. You look lovely, he said, his admiration evident in his eyes. As do you, she returned with a small smile. I've never seen you in a suit before. Not my usual attire, he admitted, but I thought the occasion warranted it. Before they could say more, Tucker appeared at the door. Riders coming, boss. Looks like Marshal Dawson and 2 others. Rhett nodded, his expression turning serious. Show them in when they arrive. He turned to Tessa. Are you ready? She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, he said quietly, you hold the power here, not him. No matter what he says, no matter what he threatens, you're not alone anymore. The words gave her strength. She nodded, squaring her shoulders as the sound of horses and men's voices grew louder outside. Moments later, Marshal Dawson entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Behind him came a man Tessa had hoped never to see again, Frederick Winstead. He looked much as she remembered, tall and imposing in an expensive suit, his dark hair and beard immaculately groomed, his posture perfect. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold and calculating, as they swept the room before settling on her with an intensity that once would have terrified her. "Teresa," he said, his cultured Philadelphia accent out of place in the Arizona ranch house. "How unexpected to find you in such rustic surroundings." Tessa felt Rhett tense beside her but kept her voice steady as she replied, "It's Tessa now, Frederick. And these rustic surroundings have been a welcome refuge." Frederick's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been searching for you for months, my dear. Your aunt has been beside herself with worry." "I find that hard to believe," Tessa said coolly. "Given that I left her a letter explaining my departure." Marshal Dawson cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson, Miss Hawkins, this is Mr. Frederick Winstead of Philadelphia. Mr. Winstead, our hosts." Rhett stepped forward, his posture relaxed but watchful. "Mr. Winstead, welcome to Lawson Ranch." His tone made it clear the welcome was merely a formality. Frederick barely acknowledged him, his attention fixed on Tessa. "You're looking well, Teresa, though I see evidence of mishaps in your travels." His gaze lingered on the fading bruise near her temple. "Mishaps you arranged," Tessa said flatly. "We know you hired those men to attack the stagecoach, Frederick. They've confessed." A flicker of surprise crossed his face before his composure returned. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "I merely followed the trail of a runaway fiancée who clearly wasn't in her right mind." "Miss Hawkins is perfectly sound of mind," Rhett interjected, his voice hard, "and no longer your fiancée by her own choice." Frederick finally turned his attention to Rhett, sizing him up with a dismissive glance. "And you are, what exactly? Her protector, how gallant." "Her friend," Rhett replied evenly. "One of many who know exactly what kind of man you are, Winstead." Before Frederick could respond, Mrs. Benson appeared at the door. "Lunch is served, Mr. Lawson." "Thank you, Mrs. Benson," Rhett said, offering his arm to Tessa. "Shall we, Miss Hawkins?" She took his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence as they led the way to the dining room. Marshal Dawson followed with Frederick, whose displeasure was evident in the tight line of his mouth. The meal began with uncomfortable formality. Mrs. Benson's excellent cooking roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from her garden would normally have been cause for appreciation, but tension thickened the air. Frederick barely touched his food, his eyes rarely leaving Tessa. "I must say, Teresa," he finally broke the strained silence, "this is a far cry from the future we planned together in Philadelphia. Teaching school in a mining town, living in frontier conditions, is this truly what you want?" "It is," Tessa said firmly. "A life of my own choosing, Frederick." "Something you never allowed me." "I gave you everything," he countered, a hint of genuine bewilderment in his voice. "The finest clothes, jewelry, and enviable position in society." "Everything except freedom," Tessa replied. "Everything except respect." Frederick's expression hardened. "I respected you enough to make you my wife, to overlook your common background and unfortunate independence." "Respect isn't control, Mr. Winstead," Rhett said mildly, "and a woman's independence isn't something to be overlooked, it's to be valued. I don't recall asking for the opinion of a cattle rancher," Frederick said dismissively. Marshal Dawson cleared his throat. "Mr. Winstead, perhaps we should address the matter at hand. You came to Arizona territory looking for Miss Hawkins. You found her. She's made it clear she has no desire to return with you to Philadelphia. I suggest you accept her decision and return east." "It's not that simple, Marshal," Frederick said smoothly. "Teresa and I had an understanding, a commitment, her aunt as her legal guardian." "I have no legal guardian," Tessa interrupted firmly. "I am 23 years old, legally an adult by any standard. My aunt had no authority to promise me to anyone." Nevertheless, Frederick persisted, announcements were made, arrangements set in motion. Your sudden departure caused considerable embarrassment. I left because you hurt me, Tessa said bluntly. Because you threatened worse if I didn't comply with your every demand. Frederick's face darkened. That's absurd. I never. You struck her, Rhett cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. More than once, according to Miss Hawkins. And then you hired men to find her, men who murdered 3 innocent people and nearly killed her as well. Preposterous, Frederick scoffed. Where's your proof of these wild accusations? The surviving robbers have confessed, Marshal Dawson said. They described receiving telegrams and money from you, Mr. Winstead, instructions to find a woman matching Miss Hawkins' description traveling west. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Frederick's eyes. Those men are criminals, liars. Their word against mine means nothing. Perhaps, the Marshal conceded, but it's enough to warrant further investigation, especially given the murders. This is outrageous, Frederick sputtered, his composure cracking. I am a respected businessman, not some common criminal. I came here to retrieve my fiancée, nothing more. I am not your fiancée, Tessa said clearly, meeting his gaze without flinching. I formally ended our engagement the day I left Philadelphia. I will not be returning with you, not today, not ever. Frederick stared at her, as if seeing her truly for the first time. The Tessa who sat before him was not the cowed, obedient woman he'd controlled in Philadelphia. This Tessa met his gaze steadily, her voice firm, her posture confident. You've changed, he said finally. Yes, she agreed. I have. A calculating look entered his eyes. Perhaps I was overly controlling at times. I apologize if I made you feel diminished. We could start fresh, Teresa. I could be more accommodating to your desire for independence. The attempt at manipulation was so transparent that Tessa almost laughed. No, Frederick, there will be no fresh start. Our relationship is over. His mask of civility slipped just for a moment, revealing the rage beneath. Because of him, he demanded, jerking his head toward Rhett. You've barely known this man weeks, yet you throw away everything we built over years. I threw away nothing worth keeping, Tessa replied calmly. And Mr. Lawson has shown me more respect in 3 weeks than you did in 3 years. Frederick's hand tightened around his water glass. You're making a serious mistake, Teresa, one you'll regret. The only mistake I made was not leaving sooner, she said. Marshal Dawson leaned forward. Mr. Winstead, I think we're done here. Miss Hawkins has made her position clear. I suggest you finish your meal and prepare to return to Tucson with me. And if I refuse, Frederick challenged. Then you'll be escorted from the property, Rhett said matter-of-factly. And should you attempt to approach Miss Hawkins again, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Frederick's eyes narrowed. You have no right to interfere in a private matter between me and my former, Tessa interjected firmly. Former fiancé. This isn't over, Teresa, Frederick said, his voice low. You belong in Philadelphia with me. You'll see that eventually. Actually, Mr. Winstead, Marshal Dawson said, this is over. Based on the statements of the captured robbers, I have enough to detain you for questioning regarding the stagecoach attack. You'll be accompanying me to Tucson today, where the territorial prosecutor will decide if charges are warranted. Frederick's face paled. You can't be serious, on the word of common criminals. On their word, and the fact that you traveled all the way to Arizona territory with unusual haste once they were captured, the marshal replied. Suspicious timing, wouldn't you say? For the first time, Frederick looked genuinely alarmed. This is absurd. I demand to speak with your superior. I have connections in Washington. I'm sure you do, Rhett interrupted coolly. But this is Arizona territory, Mr. Winstead, not Philadelphia. Your connections don't reach here. Frederick stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I won't forget this, he said, his gaze moving from Rhett to Tessa. Either of you. Marshal Dawson rose as well. Mr. Winstead, I need to ask you to accompany me back to Tucson. We can do this quietly, or I can put you in handcuffs, your choice. For a tense moment, Frederick seemed on the verge of further protest. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, the fight going out of him as he recognized the futility of his position. I'll come peacefully, he said stiffly, but my attorney will have something to say about this treatment." "I'm sure he will," the marshal replied, unimpressed. "Mr. Lawson, Miss Hawkins, thank you for your hospitality. I'll see Mr. Winstead safely to Tucson and keep you informed of developments." As they prepared to leave, Frederick turned to Tessa one last time. "This isn't how it was supposed to be," he said, an odd note of genuine regret in his voice. "No," she agreed softly. "It wasn't. Goodbye, Frederick." He held her gaze a moment longer, then allowed Marshal Dawson to lead him from the room. When they were gone, Tessa sagged in her chair, the tension of the confrontation finally catching up with her. Rhett was immediately at her side, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" she nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, better than all right, actually. I feel free." Rhett smiled, relief evident in his expression. "You were magnificent, Tessa. I don't think I've ever seen anyone stand their ground with such quiet strength." "I had good support," she said, reaching for his hand. "I couldn't have faced him without knowing you were beside me." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "But I'm glad I could be here for you." Mrs. Benson appeared in the doorway, her face anxious. "They've gone. That dreadful man won't be back, not if he knows what's good for him," Rhett assured her. "And the marshal will see he's held accountable for his role in the stagecoach attack." The housekeeper nodded approvingly. "Good, never liked the look of him too smooth by half." She began clearing the barely touched lunch plates. "Will you be wanting coffee in the parlor, Mr. Lawson?" "That would be lovely, Mrs. Benson," Tessa answered for him. "Thank you." In the parlor, they sat side by side on the sofa, both processing the events of the day. The confrontation with Frederick had gone better than Tessa had dared hope. She had stood her ground, and with Marshal Dawson's intervention, Frederick was unlikely to trouble her again anytime soon. "What happens now?" Rhett asked quietly. Tessa considered the question. "I'll go to Castle Dome as planned. The school term begins in 2 weeks, and I've committed to the position." "And us?" His voice was hesitant, so unlike his usual confidence. Tessa turned to face him, studying the features that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I meant what I said yesterday, Rhett. Castle Dome isn't so far. We could continue to explore these feelings between us." Relief spread across his face. "I'd like that very much." "But," she continued, needing to be completely honest, "I need to establish myself first. To know I can stand on my own before I consider standing with someone else, even someone as wonderful as you." Rhett nodded, understanding in his gray eyes. "I respect that, Tessa. Your independence is part of what I admire about you." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I'm willing to wait, to give you the time and space you need. We can take things slowly." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Here was a man who genuinely valued her autonomy, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a threat. So different from Frederick, who had sought to crush her spirit at every turn. "Thank you," she said softly. He leaned forward, his intentions clear, and Tessa met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded to the warmth of his lips on hers. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that properly since yesterday," Rhett admitted, a boyish smile lighting his features. Tessa laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. "Was it worth the wait?" "Definitely," he murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "As you will be." The remaining days at Lawson Ranch passed in a pleasant blur. Tessa continued to help with the ranch accounts, bringing order to the chaotic bookkeeping. In the evenings, she and Rhett would sit on the porch or in the parlor, talking for hours about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, books they'd read, places they hoped to see. Marshal Dawson sent word that Frederick remained in custody in Tucson. The territorial prosecutor was building a case against him based on the stagecoach robber's testimony and telegraph records showing money transfers. Frederick had engaged the best attorney in the territory, but his prospects for a quick release seemed dim. On Tessa's last night at the ranch, Rhett arranged a special dinner. Mrs. Benson outdid herself with a feast of roast chicken, fresh vegetables from her garden, and an apple pie that reminded Tessa of her mother's baking. After dinner, they walked in the moonlight, Rhett's hand warm around hers. "I'll miss this," Tessa admitted as they paused by the corral. "The peace here, the feeling of safety." "You can return whenever you wish," Rhett said. "This will always be a place where you're welcome." She turned to face him, moonlight silvering his features. "I'll be thinking of you every day in Castle Dome. And I'll be counting the days until I can ride in to see you," he promised. "Perhaps every other Sunday I could attend church services, then take you to dinner at the hotel." Tessa smiled at the thought. "The whole town will be gossiping within hours." "Let them," Rhett said with a grin. "I don't mind if people know I'm courting the prettiest schoolteacher in the territory." "Courting?" Tessa arched an eyebrow, though her heart leapt at the word. "If that's acceptable to you," he said more seriously. "I know you need time, Tessa. I'm not rushing you into anything, but I want to be clear about my intentions." "And what are your intentions, Mr. Lawson?" she asked softly. He took both her hands in his. "To show you that not all men are like Frederick Winstead, that love can strengthen rather than diminish you, that partnership doesn't have to mean losing yourself." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "To prove worthy of your trust and eventually your heart." The simple eloquence of his words moved her deeply. "You're already worthy, Rhett," she whispered, "and my heart is already more yours than I care to admit." Joy lit his face. He drew her close, his kiss tender but filled with promise. Tessa leaned into him, savoring the moment and the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Tucker brought the ranch wagon around, loaded with Tessa's trunk and additional supplies. Rhett had insisted she take to Castle Dome books for her students, fabric for new clothes, even a small writing desk for her quarters at the schoolhouse. "You've given me far too much," Tessa protested as Rhett helped her into the wagon. "Not nearly enough," he countered with a smile. "Consider it an investment in education." Mrs. Benson tearfully embraced her before she left. "You come back and visit, you hear? This house could use a woman's touch more permanent like." "Mrs. Benson?" Rhett admonished, though his expression was more amused than annoyed. "Well, it's true," the housekeeper said unrepentantly, "and I'm too old to be subtle." Tessa laughed, hugging the older woman. "I'll visit often, I promise." The journey to Castle Dome took most of the day, with Rhett driving the wagon and Tessa beside him on the bench. They spoke of practical matters, her duties at the school, the town's amenities, the best days for Rhett to visit. Beneath the conversation lay a current of anticipation, both excited and nervous about this new chapter in their relationship. As they crested a hill in late afternoon, Castle Dome came into view below them. The town was larger than Tessa had expected, with several streets of wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them, and the silver mines visible in the distance. Neat houses lined the outskirts, evidence of the community's prosperity and growth. "It's lovely," Tessa said, relief in her voice. "This would be a good place to begin her new life." "It's a fine community," Rhett agreed. "Growing, but still with strong values. You'll be welcomed here." He guided the wagon down the hill toward town. As they approached, people stopped to look, curious about newcomers. Several men tipped their hats in greeting to Rhett, who was clearly known and respected in the area. They stopped first at the schoolhouse, a modest but well-maintained building at the edge of town. Attached to it was a small house that would serve as Tessa's residence. "Miss Hawkins." A portly man in a suit hurried toward them as they pulled up. "Welcome to Castle Dome. I'm Harold Jenkins, head of the school board." "Mr. Jenkins," Tessa greeted him, accepting Rhett's hand to help her down from the wagon. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." "The pleasure is ours," Jenkins assured her. "We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." He nodded to Rhett. "Mr. Lawson, good to see you, sir. Thank you for escorting our new teacher safely to town." "My pleasure, Jenkins," Rhett replied, already beginning to unload Tessa's trunk. Mr. Jenkins showed them through the schoolhouse and the attached living quarters. The classroom was spacious and well lit, with rows of desks, a large blackboard, and shelves of books. The living area was modest but comfortable, a sitting room, small bedroom, kitchen, and bathing area. "It's perfect," Tessa said sincerely. "Exactly what I hoped for." "Excellent," Jenkins beamed. "School begins on Monday, which gives you 4 days to settle in. 42 children enrolled so far, ages 6 to 16. Most are eager learners, though a few of the older boys might test your authority initially. I'm not concerned, Tessa assured him. I've dealt with reluctant students before. With Jenkins' help, Rhett brought in all of Tessa's belongings, arranging the furniture according to her wishes. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows. I should get back to the ranch, Rhett said reluctantly. It's a long ride and I don't want to travel these roads in full dark. Of course, Tessa said, though her heart sank at the thought of his departure. Despite her desire for independence, the prospect of her first night alone in a strange town was daunting. I'll leave you to get settled, Miss Hawkins, Jenkins said, sensing the couple's desire for privacy. My wife will stop by in the morning to introduce you around town. After Jenkins left, Rhett took Tessa's hands in his. You'll be all right here. I will, she assured him more confidently than she felt. It's a lovely town and everyone seems welcoming. I'll ride in on Sunday, he promised. To check on you and attend church services, of course. Of course, she agreed with a smile, purely for spiritual reasons. He laughed, then grew serious. If you need anything at all, send word to the ranch. I can be here in half a day. I'll be fine, she said softly, but thank you. He drew her close, his kiss gentle yet lingering. When they parted, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Until Sunday, he said. Until Sunday, she echoed. Tessa stood on the small porch of her new home, watching as Rhett's wagon disappeared down the dusty street. For a moment, loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. Then she straightened her shoulders and turned back to her house. She had achieved what she set out to do: independence, a position of respect, a community where she could build a new life. And now, unexpectedly, she had found something more: a man who valued her strength rather than seeking to diminish it. The days before school began passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Jenkins introduced her to the townspeople, all of whom welcomed her warmly. The ladies of the church brought food and small gifts for her new home. The children, curious about their new teacher, would peer in the windows or hover near her door, scampering away when she noticed them. Tessa prepared her classroom meticulously, organizing books, planning lessons, learning the names of her students from the enrollment list. By Sunday morning, she felt ready for the challenges ahead, both professional and personal. Church services were well attended in Castle Dome, the small wooden building packed with families. Tessa sat near the front, aware of curious glances and whispered comments. As the congregation sang the opening hymn, a familiar figure slipped into the pew beside her. "Good morning," Rhett whispered, his smile warming her more than the Arizona sun streaming through the windows. "You came," she replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "I promised I would." His hand found hers between them, hidden from the curious eyes of the congregation. After the service, Rhett proudly introduced her to those he knew in town. The proprietor of the general store, the banker, the blacksmith, and his wife all greeted her with genuine friendliness, though she noticed speculative glances between Rhett and herself. They had lunch at the town's small hotel, where the dining room offered surprisingly good food. Afterward, they walked through town, Rhett pointing out places of interest, his hand occasionally brushing hers in a gesture both casual and deliberate. "Will you come to the ranch next Sunday?" he asked as they reached her house. "Mrs. Benson is already planning the menu. She says you're too thin." Tessa laughed. "I'd love to. After my first week of teaching, I might need the escape." "You'll be wonderful," he assured her. "Those children are fortunate to have you." His confidence bolstered her own. When he left that evening, the goodbye was easier, tempered by the certainty of seeing him again in just 7 days. The school term began successfully. Tessa's students, while initially wary of their new teacher, quickly responded to her firm but kind approach. The older boys tested her authority as predicted, but her quiet confidence and refusal to be provoked soon won their respect. Every Sunday became a cherished ritual. Alternating between visits to the ranch and Rhett's attendance at Castle Dome's church, their courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised them both. In Castle Dome, Tessa established herself as a respected member of the community. At the ranch, she grew closer to Mrs. Benson and came to understand the complexities of the operation Rhett managed so capably. 2 months after her arrival in Castle Dome, news came that Frederick Winstead had been formally charged as an accessory to the stagecoach robberies and murders. His trial was set for spring, and both Tessa and Rhett would be called to testify. The news was sobering but no longer terrifying. Frederick's power over her was broken. As autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson, Tessa found herself settled into a life more satisfying than she had dared hope for when fleeing Philadelphia. Her teaching brought daily joy, her place in the community was secure, and her heart was fully engaged in a relationship built on mutual respect and deepening love. On a crisp October Sunday, Rhett rode to Castle Dome as usual, but instead of attending church, he asked Tessa to accompany him on a ride into the mountains. "I have something to show you," he said mysteriously, helping her mount the gentle mare she'd come to think of as her own. They rode higher into the foothills, the air growing cooler as they climbed. Autumn had transformed the landscape, the cottonwoods along the stream's brilliant gold against the evergreens. After an hour's ride, they came to a high meadow overlooking the valley below. Castle Dome was visible in the distance, and beyond it, the faint outline of Lawson Ranch. "It's beautiful," Tessa said, gazing at the panorama before them. "This land is part of the ranch property," Rhett told her, dismounting and helping her down. "I bought it last year, thinking it would make good summer grazing." He led her to the center of the meadow, where a small stream curved around a stand of pines. "What do you think of this spot?" Tessa looked around, puzzled by the question. "It's lovely, peaceful." "I thought so too," he said, taking her hands in his. "Tessa, I've been thinking a lot about the future, yours, mine, perhaps ours together." Her heart began to race at the seriousness in his tone. "Have you?" He nodded, suddenly nervous in a way she'd never seen before. "I know you value your independence. It's one of the things I love most about you, and I would never ask you to give up teaching or the life you've built in Castle Dome." "I know that," she assured him. "But I've been wondering if there might be a way to have both your independence and a life together." He gestured to the meadow around them. "I thought perhaps a home here, halfway between the ranch and town. Close enough for you to teach, for me to manage the ranch, but a place that would truly be ours." Tessa's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. "Rhett, are you?" He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Tessa Hawkins, I love you. Not despite your independence, but because of it, because you're strong and kind and braver than anyone I've ever known." His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I'm asking if you would consider building a life with me, not as my possession, but as my equal, my partner, my wife." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Rhett, I would be honored to build that life with you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love words couldn't express. When they finally parted, both were laughing and crying at once. "I've been carrying this for weeks," Rhett admitted, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring not ostentatious like the one Frederick had given her, but a delicate band of gold set with a single perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained, "simple but strong, like the woman who wore it, like you." As he slipped it onto her finger, Tessa felt the rightness of it, not a symbol of possession but of partnership, of a love freely given and received. "When?" she asked softly, admiring how the pearl caught the autumn sunlight. "Whenever you wish," Rhett replied. "Spring, after Frederick's trial is over, or sooner if you prefer. I know the school term ends at Christmas." "Christmas," Tessa decided. "A new beginning at the end of the year." His smile was radiant. "Christmas it is, then." They spent the afternoon in the meadow planning their future, the house they would build there, how Tessa would continue teaching through the spring term, perhaps longer if the school board agreed. How they would divide their time between the ranch and their new home until it was complete. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the return journey. Tessa took one last look at the meadow that would become their home, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and love. "Thank you," she said softly. Rhett looked puzzled. For what? For finding me that day on the road, for seeing me truly seeing me when I was at my most broken. Understanding filled his eyes. I think we found each other, Tessa, and neither of us has been broken since. They rode back toward Castle Dome hand in hand, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and promise. Behind them lay the shadows of the past: Frederick's cruelty, Elizabeth's tragic death, months of fear and running. Before them stretched a future neither had dared imagine just months ago, a future built on love, respect, and the freedom to be their truest selves together. The wedding was held on Christmas Eve in Castle Dome's small church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Snow had fallen in the mountains, rare for the area, making the day feel even more magical. Tessa wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her honey-brown hair adorned with a crown of winter berries and evergreen. Mrs. Benson wept openly as Tessa walked down the aisle toward Rhett, who stood tall and handsome in his best suit, his gray eyes never leaving hers. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, along with the ranch hands and nearby ranchers who respected Rhett. Their vows were traditional, but with a meaningful addition they had written together. I promise to honor your independence even as we build our life as one. To walk beside you, never above or behind, to be your partner in all things, your comfort in sorrow, your joy in celebration, your home in this world. As winter gave way to spring, construction began on their house in the meadow. Rhett insisted on the finest materials, the most skilled craftsmen. Tessa continued teaching, beloved by her students and respected by the community. When Frederick Winstead's trial concluded with his conviction and sentencing to 10 years in the territorial prison, the last shadow from her past finally lifted. By the following Christmas, their house was complete, a beautiful home of native stone and timber, with wide windows to capture the mountain views and a wraparound porch like the one at Lawson Ranch. Inside, Tessa's books shared space with Rhett's. Her piano stood beside his father's desk, and photographs of both their families adorned the walls. It was truly theirs, a physical manifestation of the life they had built together. On Christmas morning, as snow dusted the meadow outside their bedroom window, Tessa gave Rhett a gift more precious than any material thing: the news that they would welcome a child in the summer. His joy was boundless. His tender care of her in the months that followed, a daily reminder of how different this man was from the one she had fled. Rose Elizabeth Lawson was born on a warm July evening in 1880, with Mrs. Benson acting as midwife and Rhett pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When he first held his daughter, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy dark hair that already showed signs of his own curls. "Just like her mother." "She has your eyes," Tessa observed, noting the gray-blue of the newborn's unfocused gaze. "Poor child," Rhett joked, but his pride was evident. Tessa took a year away from teaching to care for their daughter, but when Rose was old enough, she returned to her classroom 3 days a week with Mrs. Benson, happily caring for the child on those days. The arrangement satisfied both Tessa's need for intellectual engagement and her desire to be present for her daughter's early years. 2 years later, Thomas Rhett Lawson joined their family, a sturdy boy with his mother's honey-brown hair and his father's determined chin. Mrs. Benson declared him the image of Rhett as a child and spoiled him accordingly, though Tessa and Rhett were careful to raise both children with the same values of respect, kindness, and independence that defined their marriage. As the years passed, Lawson Ranch prospered under Rhett's management, expanding to become one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Tessa eventually became headmistress of Castle Dome School, which grew along with the town. Their meadow home remained their sanctuary, a place where love and respect flourished. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch, watching their children play in the meadow where Rhett had proposed. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of the day he had found her broken and bleeding on the road, of the journey that had brought them to this moment. More often, they discussed the future, the children's education, improvements to the ranch, Books Tessa wanted to write now that she had begun publishing stories in territorial newspapers. You ever regret it? Rhett asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Coming west, all you went through? Tessa considered the question, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the years. Not for a moment, she said softly. Every step, even the painful ones, led me here to you, to our children, to this life we've built. He squeezed her hand, his gray eyes warm with love. When I found you that day, I thought I was saving you. You were, she assured him. Perhaps, he acknowledged with a smile. But I think you saved me too, Tessa, from loneliness, from a life half-lived. In the meadow below them, Rose and Thomas chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The ranch hands were driving cattle in the distant pastures, and lights were beginning to twinkle in Castle Dome. All around them was the life they had built together, not perfect, but real and rich and entirely their own. We saved each other, Tessa said simply. And that's the greatest gift of all. As darkness fell, they called the children inside for supper, moving from the porch into the warm light of their home. Behind them, the first stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, witnesses to a love story that had begun in violence but transformed into something beautiful, a testament to healing, to courage, and to the power of finding someone who sees you, values you, and loves you exactly as you are.